Welcome to Medicaid Mastery, a cut above explaining the real long-term care Medicaid system.
Welcome back to Medicaid Mastery. I'm Evan Mack here with Antony Turbeville, your guide to navigating long-term care planning. Tony is the founder of Platinum Benefit Services and one of Florida's most trusted Medicaid strategists. Today, we're answering an important question for business owners and families with land. Can Medicaid take your farm or small business? Let's break down how these assets are treated and how you can protect what you've worked so hard to build. Welcome back, Tony.
Thank you, Evan. Good to be here.
Today's episode is, can you protect the family, farm, or small business from Medicaid recovery? So to start things off, why is Medicaid recovery such a big concern for families who own a farm or small business?
Well, Medicaid recovery is actually a concern for anybody who applies for Medicaid and receives benefits through the Medicaid system, because Medicaid has the right to recover the money they've spent, particularly in long-term care. When it's a long-term care situation like home health care, assisted living, or nursing home care, the statutes allow for Medicaid to recover the money that they spent, and they normally can do that from the probate estate. Now, different states have different definitions of probate estate for Medicaid. Many states allow what's called an expanded recovery. So it includes assets that you were had beneficiaries on, they can claw them back, all that kind of stuff. In Florida, that is not true. So in Florida, Medicaid can only recover for assets that go through the probate process. So it's a concern for everybody, because if their assets don't avoid probate, many of those assets, not all, there's some exceptions, can be grabbed by Medicaid to repay the state for what they've spent on care. So it's not just business owners and farmers, but it also applies to them.
So what happens if the business or land is jointly owned or, with other family members? I think that can get kind of complicated the more people that are involved.
Yeah, it can get complicated, but it can also be a blessing. So if that business or the land has been owned by more than the applicant and the applicant's spouse, right, because they're viewed together, but let's say it's owned by two brothers, right? If the one brother refuses to sell his interest in the business or the farm, then that makes the entire business or farm unavailable for the applicant, and it no longer counts as an asset when calculating benefits. Now, how that property or business passes after death also becomes important. Is it going to go entirely back to the brother who's the joint owner, or is that portion going to go to the heirs of the applicant? And if it is going to the heirs of the applicant, and depending on the structure, it's got to be set up so that it goes to the heirs or the brother outside of probate so that it can't be recovered from.
So, Tony, are these assets treated differently than a home or savings account under Medicaid?
Well, they certainly are treated different than a home. In Florida, as we've discussed on other podcasts, the home is pretty much your castle. Medicaid can't collect back from it, even if it were to go through probate. Now, obviously, in my opinion, and I'm not an attorney and I can't offer legal advice, but for me personally, I'm going to want to avoid probate regardless of whether Medicaid is involved or not. But let's say for whatever reason it doesn't happen, the home can go through probate and not be collected back from Medicaid. A savings account going through probate is available to be attached by Medicaid. So would a farm, and so would a jointly owned family business. So it is incredibly important that it all avoids probate, but the home can slide through. You got to go through the probate process, but it's not going to get attached.
Can you structure ownership in a way that protects the asset from being counted?
As I explained prior, if it's jointly owned, say two brothers and one refuses, you can certainly do that. There are other things that can be done to make an asset non-countable. For example, I'll give you a scenario that happened. We had a person who owned several $1 million worth of commercial real estate. Now, let me say, many times when somebody has several $1 million, while we can always get a Medicaid, it doesn't necessarily make sense for them to do so. In this particular scenario, it did. So what happened is we took the commercial real estate, we rolled it into an LLC, and then the $18,000 a month in net income that came from those rentals, we paid $8,000 to each of 2 children. So that gave $16,000 of income to the kids, left $2,000, and we paid that to the nursing home. Call it sacrificial money, but we protected all of the real estate, got $16,000 a month for the kids, and got the medical bills paid for the father.
So Tony, you find it's more difficult to get these services if you have a lot of money, or can you still find ways to do that even if you got some assets and some money in the bank as far as Medicaid goes?
Well, it's not necessarily easier or harder. Um, it just becomes there is a point where so I don't judge anybody's ethics. It's not for me to tell people, whether they should or shouldn't ethically. My job is to help the family. They paid into the system. Doesn't matter to me. I have no judgment there. But I do help families look at, without giving legal advice or tax advice, just what to consider. And is it going to trigger too many tax consequences to liquidate certain assets, to convert them to something that's non-countable? Are there tax issues? Are there investment return issues that they have to consider? There comes a point where you go, I can do it, but it doesn't make sense for you to do, and here's why. Where that dollar mark is varies depending on the assets and the structure. So basically, I think we've talked about this in other podcasts. I don't care if somebody has $5,000 or $5 million. We'll look at the individual situation. There is always a way to do it. The family can decide whether it makes sense to do or not.
So are there strategies that allow someone to qualify for Medicaid while keeping the business going?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, for example, a simple way to do it is the business can easily be made non-countable by co-owner saying, no, I'm not willing to sell, but it can also be excluded because it is an asset essential for self-support, which is a rule in the Medicaid manual. Now, the issue is if they're taking a substantial income out of that, you don't necessarily want to lose that substantial income. So the business can then either pay a higher salary out to an existing employee in the family, or hire somebody else in the family, perhaps the spouse, because the spouse's income doesn't come into play. And let's say there's $100,000 being distributed out to the applicant, that gets rerouted to the spouse, who's now stepping into the business and filling those shoes. And now there's no additional income, coming out of it to pay to the nursing home. Or home health care and assisted living is a little different, but the concepts are the same.
So how does the state look at business income or property value during a Medicaid application?
So property value depends. So the house, as we've said before, is exempt. Other real estate, they're going to look at the fair market value, and they're going to say that is a countable asset unless there's a reason to make it non-countable. There are 4 types of property in Medicaid, essentially: homestead property that's up for sale at fair market value, rented at fair market value, or up for rent at fair market value, and those that aren't. So those that don't meet one of those 4 criteria count in calculating. If they meet those 4 criteria, they don't count in calculating, right? So if you put a piece of property up for sale, it magically doesn't count. So what if you take a portion of a property, transfer or sell it to someone else in the family, and then put the remaining, let's say 99% up for sale? Well, it's an exempt asset that nobody's going to buy because nobody wants only 99%, right? They're going to want everything. So it makes it non-countable, but it also makes it unlikely to sell, even though it is legitimately up for sale.
Throughout your career, though, do you have a scenario or anything where a family successfully protected a business or a farm?
Sure, many times. And one was what I gave earlier with the commercial properties, because that was a business. We just formalized it in an LLC. We've certainly done, I'm in Central Florida, so many strawberry farmers, that entire business, plus all the property that's tied to it. Plus we'll restructure the income and how the business pays things out so that a very minimal amount of income goes to the long-term care scenario. So to give you kind of a funny story that you asked, for example, I had a strawberry farmer in Plant City. I'm in Lakeland, about 15 minutes away. And he came to me and he said, this is what I got. I told him how we were going to do it. And I said, let me explain how this service agreement works. And he said, you don't have to explain that to me. I know how it works. It says you're going to get my daddy on Medicaid. And if you don't, me and you's going to have a problem. That's what it says. And I kind of laughed. So, well, you pretty well summed it up. And so that's one. We've saved orange groves. We've saved businesses that are, retail businesses that have a good income just by shifting around who in the family is running and pulling the salary from it.
So what should a business owner do right now if they're thinking about long-term care needs that's down the road?
We touch on this pretty regularly in podcasts, and it's good that we do because it gets very confusing for people. People hear, you need to plan 5 years ahead. Well, we've talked about it, and in most middle America, which is the core of this market, doesn't want to give away all their assets 5 years ahead. 5 years ahead, they're feeling healthy and everything's fine, and they don't really imagine it going wrong. So they want to continue to control what they have. Now, if they're willing to give up direct control of their assets and put it in a special trust and have the kids run it and all that, that's fine. They can do that. But that's not my core market, right? My core market is the normal family that just doesn't give up control until the last minute. Dad or mom has held on to everything. Now dad or mom has to go to the nursing home and they need help. So the biggest thing I can say, what they should do is they should get competent counsel. And that's not necessarily legal counsel, right? It's application counsel and legal counsel. And we can help them in both categories. Again, I'm not an attorney, but I know a lot about what can get through the system. So they should get competent counsel, not listen to their neighbor, not listen to the person at the nursing home that's telling them you got to pay everything and sign it all over to me. Go get competent counsel, get all the facts, then make a decision on what you should or shouldn't do.
In your business, though, and what you do, though, how are you able to do that as far as get a person that information that they need before they make that mistake? Is it the way you guys advertise? Is it the word of mouth? How are you able to help these people that might make that mistake?
So we do some advertising, but by far it's word of mouth. We have many referral sources, nursing homes, home health care agencies, assisted living facilities, happy customers. I mean, we're somewhere way north of 17,000 of these cases now. So we have a lot of families that we've helped over the years that send us other families and neighbors and, that kind of stuff. So while there is some limited advertising, it is 97% word of mouth, if I had to guess.
Awesome. Tony, thank you for your time, sir.
You're so welcome. Good to see you.
This has been Medicaid Mastery with Antony Turbeville. If you or someone you know needs expert help avoiding costly Medicaid mistakes and protecting your business or legacy, visit platben.com. That's PLATBEN.com. If this episode helped you, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.